To the public, they appeared to be a happy family. They own businesses, they have a child, but court records are alleging they have a dark side. He is accused of ordering a hit on a man and his pregnant girlfriend. His wife has just been arrested on several charges as well. They allege that she is part of a criminal gang. This is a wild case that may be an example of you never really know who someone really is. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. All right, let's get to this new twist in this wild story of alleged gang violence in a quiet town in Indiana. I want you to meet the Bachmann family. Courtney and Henry are the parents. They live in New Albany, Indiana. It's in the southern part of the Hoosier State, right across the river from Louisville, Kentucky. The Bachmanns are business owners in their community. They reportedly own a bar and a tattoo shop. Now, from what we've seen, the Bachmanns seem like a really nice couple. It appears they have a child, a young girl, and it appears that this family really has their lives together. But then, May 13th of this year, gunshots were fired around 11 o'clock in the morning outside of this business in New Albany, Indiana. Now, fortunately, no one was killed, but allegedly an SUV pulled up, fired several shots, and took off. A bystander in a barber shop was shot in the foot. Quickly thereafter, 3 people were arrested for this shooting. Here are their mugshots: Joseph Felicia, Cody Vest, and Aaron Brown. Police say that Felicia paid Brown $5,000 to allegedly carry out an attack on a man and his pregnant girlfriend. He even allegedly gave Brown the weapon to do it. Court documents say that when Brown was arrested, gave up his co-defendants, he provided the location of key evidence in this case. Now, Vest is accused of helping modify the SUV that the shooter fired from to help cover up the crime. All of this took place back in May. All 3 men are also facing some pretty hefty drug offenses as well. But police were done with their investigation. Their investigation actually led them to a local businessman, a family man. His name, Henry Bachmann. Now, when Bachmann was arrested, this was in September, neighbors told the local TV station WHAS that he seemed like a really nice guy who loved to chat. He owned a bar, owned a tattoo shop. Both of those locations were raided by police in September when he was arrested. And it turns out that Felicia wasn't allegedly the only one willing to pay money to take out a target. The man who was targeted in the shooting said that Bachmann had it out for him. And it's because of their ties to a motorcycle gang, the Outlaw Motorcycle Gang. According to the Department of Justice, outlaw motorcycle gangs are organizations whose members use their motorcycle clubs as conduits for criminal enterprises. They are highly structured criminal organizations whose members engage in criminal activities such as violent crime, weapons trafficking, and drug trafficking. In this case, the victim said he was not in good standing with an outlaw chapter called Menace 13. Police went through Bachmann's cell phone and they found several calls between Bachmann and Felicia. In one of the calls, Brown, who's the alleged shooter, says that he overheard Bachmann telling Felicia that he was frustrated that the victim had not been murdered yet. Police also got access to a group chat on the app Signal, allegedly with members of Menace 13. The chat allegedly shows Bachmann sharing a picture of the victim, the target of that alleged hit, with a police officer claiming he was, quote, switching sides. Someone allegedly responded in that chat saying, quote, "Yeah, he knows way too much to be switching sides." In a text between Felicia and Bachmann, Bachmann allegedly says that Felicia should, quote, cut him off when talking about the victim. Then, court documents state there's also camera footage showing Brown entering Felicia's home days before the alleged attempted hit, and it shows Brown leaving with an AR-15 and ammunition. Then there are jailhouse phone calls that, of course, law enforcement is listening in on. And in those calls Felicia made following his arrest, he allegedly said, quote, "Henry should be paying all my attorney fees." And he also says, quote, "Get the point across to Henry. Basically, he needs to pay my attorney fees or me and him are going to be real close friends for the next 56 years. Here is Henry Bachmann's mugshot. He's facing several charges, including conspiracy to commit murder. Now, from what we know about Bachmann and his family as he's in jail awaiting trial for a crime that could mean some significant prison time, you have to think about his wife Courtney and their young daughter. But then, the newest twist in this story. Law enforcement allege that Courtney is not innocent. This is Courtney Bachmann's mugshot. She was arrested and she has been charged with corrupt business influence, 2 counts of money laundering, 3 counts of theft, with the value being as much as $750,000, and an enhancement of committing a felony while a member of a criminal gang. According to the News and Tribune newspaper, in the wake of her husband's arrest, investigators started looking into a bar that the Bachmanns own. Investigators say that Bachmann told them that she doesn't keep payroll records and she pays her employees in cash. Authorities allegedly found nearly $35,000 in cash in their home. They also found the couple allegedly underreported sales to the state of Indiana between 2023 and 2025 by $287,778. Bachmann also allegedly failed to collect roughly $20,000 in sales tax between the same time period. Courtney Bachmann has bonded out on the charges she is facing, but her husband could be on trial as early as next month. Now, the man who seems to be linking everyone together in this case, Brown, he may be providing that information because he took a plea deal in exchange for his cooperation. He is slated to spend 12 years in prison. Before we get back to this episode of On the Case, one of the most watched shows on all of YouTube, I need to take a moment and talk about our partner and sponsor, Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. They have more than 1,000 attorneys and they win a lot. They've recovered over $25 billion for more than 500,000 clients. In the past few months, a client in Florida received $12 million after the insurance company offered just $350,000. In Pennsylvania, a client was awarded $26 million. That is 40 times the insurer's $650,000 offer. Another client in Pennsylvania received $29 million after being offered only $500,000. Even if you don't think your case is worth millions of dollars, why not fight for what you deserve? Morgan & Morgan makes it so easy to start a claim. You can do it with just 8 clicks on your phone. So if you've been injured and you need to start a claim, go to www.forthepeople.com/OTC. You can also scan this QR code on your screen or click the link below. Joining me now to talk more about this is Jim Trusty, the former chief at the Department of Justice for the Organized Crime and Gang Section. Thank you for taking the time to be with us on Law and Crime. This story involving a motorcycle gang, allegedly, which is why it's so great to talk to someone who has experience with these, because sometimes, I mean, not to do the cliche of we only hear things in movies, but this seems like the type of case that could be that. Just first off, how active are motorcycle gangs when it comes to criminal activity?
Yeah, they've got a pretty long shelf life. You know, there's certainly obviously all sorts of motorcycle clubs that are not at all involved in criminality or such low-grade criminality. It doesn't really get on the screen for law enforcement very much. But you've got some established enterprises like the Outlaws, which is the one that we're talking about today, Hell's Angels, some other regional type gangs that are motorcycle gangs that have affiliated themselves with national ones. And so they're still out there, and it tends to be kind of drug-oriented and violence-oriented, and it can be a little secular. It can be a little difficult to know what's going on from the outside, but they're still out there every day, it seems like.
Yeah, and in this case, there's apparently some sort of issue they had with the target of this alleged hit. He was in bad standing with the gang. I mean, in these cases, because I could see where it is, you charge someone with trying to orchestrate a hit, but when it comes to prosecuting a case like this, how do you link it to something larger than that if you were looking at the entire organization that they're accused of being a part of, this Menace 13 bike gang?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I mean, really, for any sort of gang criminal enterprise type case, and I was doing federal RICO cases for years, you're looking for a pattern of racketeering activity, so you're looking for more than one incident. And you're looking for kind of the best direct inside information you can get. Sometimes it's a wiretap. Sometimes, gangs are sloppy in terms of their use of telephones. I don't get the impression that's any part of this particular case. But you also, if you can't do wiretaps and you look to leverage people, you look to get informants. And this case, you always hear about omerta. You hear about the code of silence within criminal gangs, and certainly motorcycle gangs have a long history of that. And it kind of is, it's interesting in 2 directions. The first is that a lot of the violence you see in gangs is just like this case where it's inwardly directed, where they're worried about people cooperating with the police, which kind of breaks the golden rule. The second thing is, for all their talk about Omerta and for all of their condemnation of guys that are in bad standing because they're accused of cooperating, when they get arrested, a lot of them flip. And so, this is a case where you can tell from reading between the lines and even overtly at some points in the complaint that guys got arrested and immediately were giving up everything they can think of. So the authorities end up with a really good head start on this particular shooting. But whether you're going to try to build that into a broader case that tells the whole story of Menace 13, as they were called, or an outlaw affiliate, then you've got to get some historical. You've got to dig and find more and more information, which could be drug trafficking, could be acts of violence, could even be certain types of fraud that would qualify to make it into a racketeering type case.
Yeah, and in this case, the three people arrested in connection to the shooting originally were all facing drug charges, and that seems to be at the heart of this case as well. You did federal cases, big time cases. When it comes to the suspects in this case, at this point, I'm not saying they're big fish, but I mean, in terms of the level of where they would be standing in a gang, where would this rank in terms of the overall gang activity when it comes to a national group like the Outlaws?
Yeah, hard to know so far. I mean, look, one thing you'd want to know from your cooperators, and it looks like from this case they already cut a plea that envisioned cooperation with Mr. Brown. You want to know what the history is. How long have they been in the gang? What's their position? Do they have an officer's role within the motorcycle gang? That tells you a lot. How do you get into a gang like that? A lot of gangs you are beaten in. So you're hard pressed to pretend you didn't know that it was a violent organization when you spent, a half a minute or a minute having the snot beat out of you by your new colleagues. And so there's a lot of digging that goes into it, looking into old police reports, looking into old arrests, flipping people, talking to cooperators, talking to victims. You could build up a case that gives you a solid knowledge of this Menace 13 group. But really, from what we have on this particular shooting, it's hard to kind of weigh it compared to other national entities yet.
And Brown is interesting because it seemed from the court documents I've seen in the reports that he really gave up everybody, gave up the evidence. I mean, he had to cut a plea for this. He's going to get 12 years reportedly in prison. But I also think if this was a group of people that were willing to try to kill somebody allegedly because they were too close with the police or were in bad standing with the gang, and this guy's given up everybody and everybody knows his name, what does life look like for him in prison?
Yeah, difficult. And by the way, it's 12 years, but half suspended. So he did pretty well for an attempted murder or a solicitation to commit murder. And so he'll only serve something less than 6 when it's all said and done. I don't know if he's safer in jail or on the streets, because the reality is most of these gangs have contacts on the inside, have people that are there. And so he may live the life of being in some sort of segregated unit. And protective custody in most prison systems sounds like the way to go. I think, like, if I was going to prison, I would kind of volunteer to be in all by myself. But the reality is it's very grinding mentally. And so a lot of people that start off in protective custody find that 23 hours a day in lockdown ain't for them. And they end up wanting to go back in the general population, even though it could be very, very dangerous for them. So, he's going to be looking over his shoulder most likely as a cooperator. The only good thing you can say is I suspect that other people in this chain may have cooperated as well. So for all of their talk about, going after somebody who broke the rules and who was seen with a police officer, at the end of the day, they're all saving their own skins, it looks like. And in some ways, that diffuses the importance of Mr. Brown.
And in Brown's case, because I'm sure the defense attorneys for Henry Bachmann, when he goes on trial, you're really going to attack the credibility of Brown in saying, I had nothing to do with this. And like, maybe you have text messages, I didn't like the victim. I'm not an attorney, but that's the argument that I would assume they would probably make. What goes into the decision of whether you are going to give someone a plea and recognizing whether he is actually going to be a credible witness in this trial?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, number one is a lot of time behind closed doors taking a proffer. In other words, giving him the ability to talk to you and prove his worth by giving you details, some of which you know, and therefore you can tell if he's telling the truth, and some of which you don't know. I mean, it's a little like snake handling, though. You got to be really careful or they turn around and they bite you. And so some of it's internal, like you're sitting there, you're interviewing him, you're trying to find out, what is this guy protecting certain people? Is he falsely incriminating certain people? Is he consistent? But then the big thing for trial, for jury consumption, tends to be corroboration. What else can I show that shows this guy is telling the truth? And I think in this case, if I remember correctly, they got videotape from Flesia's house that shows Brown with the weapon. So
Right.
yes, it hurts Brown in terms of showing that he's an active participant, but it's perfectly consistent with what Brown told him before they recovered that video. So the more you can show from independent sources, either other cooperators that are interlocking with him, or text messages, or physical recoveries, such as the gun, which apparently they got, the car that made its way towards Louisville. Anything that they have that kind of shows this guy told the truth is going to be very important for jury consumption.
Then you have Courtney Bachmann, who's arrested, and it seems like there's a lot of financial crimes alleged related to this bar that they own. She paid employees in cash. She underreported hundreds of thousands of dollars to the state of Indiana. Seems very sketchy in terms of running a business, but in terms of how she'll be prosecuted and potentially linked to the criminal activity of her husband, how do you take those numbers of underreporting? Why would that matter, paying employees in cash? Why would that matter if she's being accused of being part of this organized crime syndicate?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're trying to make the biker bar kind of the center of the gang universe here, then it makes sense to show that even the operation of the bar was completely dirty. And that, as a husband and wife, you can certainly infer that the husband had kind of active knowledge of what she was doing. Look, I think a lot of it is probably more about pressure. They're not dying to do a tax case with whatever, a couple $100,000 worth of loss to Indiana. I think they're looking at it as put as much pressure on as many people as we can. The pressure on her could also serve as pressure on Mr. Bachmann, meaning they could get to a point where they wire a plea offer to him and say, either plead guilty or we're going to go full bore on your wife, or but if you do accept the plea, we might be able to walk away or give her a light treatment. So we'll kind of see if chivalry is alive and well when it comes to the negotiations with the Bachmann family, I suspect.
And with Bachmann, because it seems like the main link is Flesia texting Bachmann and them having some sort of conversation. There was messages in the Signal chat as well that Bachmann was part of. And then you also have Brown saying he overheard things. I know that there's probably a lot more that we don't know of what could play out at trial, but as a defense attorney, would you like your odds at this point in trying to maybe sever him from this hit that happened? How strong of a case does it seem at this point that Indiana could have?
It's just too early. I mean, I think what you would do as a defense attorney is you'd say, I hear you that this doesn't look like an airtight case. It's not a case that's built on forensics, for instance. It's built on potential cooperation and witness testimony of a lot of people that have baggage. I mean, including the victim, I'm sure. But at the end of the day, we don't really know what we don't know. Like, there could be, for all we know, there's surveillance video that captures the hit. I mean, they don't have to put that stuff into the limited documentation we've seen so far, or they might not have recovered it by that time. So case could get considerably stronger for the government. But right now, on its face, you would say, hey, it's a cooperator-driven case. Guys have baggage. This guy got a sweetheart deal. Other people may toe the line and not agree to cooperate. So yeah, you could certainly try the case from what you're looking at right now. It's just too early to know the full discovery material that you're going to see.
And then with the Bachmanns, I mean, they were business owners. I mean, they still are, and they're innocent until proven guilty. But business owners in the community, seems like a nice family on the surface. There's people when he was arrested that couldn't believe that he would be accused of something like this. When you see organized criminal activity, maybe it's a biker gang or some other form of organized criminal activity, how often is it on the facing side, they seem like very normal members of society, but then they have operations behind the scenes that no one would realize until an arrest is made?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example of that. I mean, I was heavily involved in prosecuting MS-13, a very different gang than Menace-13, although they're all enamored with that number. And it was really interesting to me because the MS-13 guys we prosecuted in the Maryland metropolitan area, Maryland, D.C., Virginia, almost all of them had day jobs. They'd go out, they'd work construction, they'd go do something on the streets. And so you really didn't have criminal activity from 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And then by Friday night, these guys would get together and they'd go out and they'd say, you know, we need to kill a rival. And they would do it. And so it was a really kind of a strange dichotomy that you had people that appeared to be just kind of working stiffs that would do normal work. Now, they might not have had a whole bunch of supporting friends and family to say, I think he's the most, you know, hardworking, law-abiding person. But there was that kind of, I don't know, dichotomy or split personality of being productive during the day and doing kind of hard work and then coming home and hooking up with a gang and going out to kill people.
And then just last one for you, because I've always just been fascinated with biker gangs and how like the Hells Angels can have a lodge, like the Elks Club. That's like an actual location. Everybody knows where it is. And yet they're recognized by like the DOJ as like a criminal syndicate. You know, MS-13 doesn't really have like a, you know, a local Rotary Club lodge in a town. I mean, how is it that these biker gangs, they can be so public? I think some of them even do like charity events, but then at the same time have this criminal part to it where we do see stories like the one that's alleged here.
Well, I think part of it is just because there's so many biker clubs, and they talk about the 99% and the 1%. You know, everyone that's in a biker club says we're part of the 99%, meaning we're lawful. And the problem is the 1% or whatever the number is that actually engage in criminal stuff say the same thing and try to have kind of a public face. So you're right. They're not the only type of gang that would try to dabble in kind of public relations. You know, the Latin Kings, for instance, were trying to elect people into office as Latin Kings. So there's kind of a strident thing to that. And I think for bikers in particular, there's a little bit of an American kind of nostalgic view that they're not really that big a threat to anybody outside their own circles, and that there is a history of them, you know, not engaging in criminal activity for at least the vast majority of people that ride motorcycles. So it's a weird dynamic you put your finger on, but I think there's almost a romanization of how these guys operate and that they're not really that dangerous, but the reality is they are. I would just add, federal prosecutors do their best to go after the clubhouses, the patches, to try to forfeit both physical property and even intellectual property from these gangs. And they've had mixed results over the years on the intellectual property, but the physical property they can usually prove up as part of a RICO and seize that.
Yeah, it's a fascinating case out of Indiana, outside of Louisville. I know that some of the defendants, they'll be headed to trial next month, and we'll see how it plays out. Jim Trusty, great to have you on Law and Crime. Thank you for being with us.
Sure, my pleasure. Good to see you.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.